interactions in VR. Right, so this set of slides is up on the GitHub repo, the IM Year 2.2 repo, so you can get it there. All right, so let's just recap a bit about what we learned last week. Right, so last week we talked about the XRTK package, right? It was this plugin that we installed in our Unity project, and it gave us an interactor and interactable system. So interactors are the VR controllers that our player uses to navigate and react and interact with objects in the scene. And then the interactables are the objects that these interactors can act upon. Okay, so last week we did our very basic cube, right, with the rigid body and with the grab interactable, and then we use the device simulator to pick it up and move it around. All right, so today we will look at how we can implement other forms of interactions. Right, so today we have three things that we want to accomplish. So the first is implementing direct interactor instead of a ray interactor. And then we will also look at creating different interactions using the events system. Okay, and then finally, we will use something called socket interactors to create a kind of snapping interaction. Okay, so let's tackle our first objective, which is the direct interactor. So when we were creating our VR interactions last week, we used this thing called the XR origin. Right, so this XR origin, it gave us a camera, it gave us a left hand, and it gave us a right hand. So if you were to explore a bit of that object, you'll see that in those left and right hand controllers, there's this component called the XR ray interactor. Right, and I mentioned last week as well that this is what does the ray casting. Okay, and it checks for the interactable objects. Right, remember, most of you were confused why you press play, straight away see this red color shape that was on your screen, right? So that was the ray casting. That was the line to let you see where the ray cast is. Okay, so this XR ray interactor that we see here, this XR ray interactor that we see over here is actually what does that. It's actually what does the ray casting. Okay, so why we need a ray cast? Why we need a ray cast is because it allows us to interact with objects from a distance. Right, so last week when we were playing around with the XR origin, the device simulator, right, whenever we pointed our controller at the cube, okay, the line will change from red to white color. Right, and then when we press the G key on our keyboard, okay, the cube would fly towards our controller, right? We would grab the cube. Okay, so you'll notice that when that happened last week, we could do that from any distance, right? We can go really far away. We just point the ray at the cube and then we can grab it. Okay, however, when we're developing our actual assignment or our actual projects, maybe next time in the future, okay, we might not want our players to have that sort of power, right? To just use the ray and interact with objects maybe like 10 meters away, right? It might not feel very realistic, especially if you're trying to do a simulator, right? Something more realistic would be having the players actually move towards the object and then quote unquote physically touch the object, right? Because they're not really touching it, it's still a virtual world, right? But they actually have to reach using the controller, touch the object with the controller and then pick it up, right? That is more realistic. So instead of using the ray interactor, because the ray interactor uses ray casting, okay, we'll use something called the direct interactor. Right, so unlike the ray interactor, okay, the direct interactor does not cast a ray to check for objects. Okay, so instead it uses the collision system. So basically this component will just use whatever collider you have on your hand and use that to detect interactables. Okay, so what this means is the range is a lot shorter than the ray interactor. That means my how far I can interact with objects will be restricted by the size of my collider. So the smaller it is, the closer your players have to be with the object in order to interact with it. Okay, so to make our controllers use this direct interactor instead of a ray interactor, okay, we first have to create one. So in order to create one, you can go to the camera offset object inside the XR origin. You then right click and then select XR and then choose direct interactor. Next, you have to go to the controller object. Okay, you look at its inspector window. Okay, then you will find this XR controller component. Alright, so this component is where we linked all our input actions last week. Okay, so look for that controller component. Then you click on the meatballs and then choose copy component. Okay, so why we need to do this is because the new item, the new direct interactor that we just created does not have any of these input actions linked, right? So we don't want to have to do all of that over again. So what we'll do is just select copy component, and then later we'll go over to the new object, and then we will paste everything there. Okay, so just choose copy component. Okay, then you will select the direct interactor object, the one we just created. Okay, and then look for similarly the XR controller component. And then click on the meatballs again and then choose paste component values. Right, and then you'll notice that once you press that, all of the actions that we were linking last week, it will now also be pasted here in this XR controller. So once that is done, the old controller, the one that was created along with the XR origin, that one we can delete it away. Then what we can do is we can select the direct interactor and then we can rename it to right controller, okay, or something similar, so that we just know which is the right, which is the left hand. Okay, so if your game or your experience requires both of your controllers to use direct interactors, okay, you can repeat the steps I just went through for your other controller. Okay, but for today's lesson, only one controller needs to be converted to using a direct interactor. Okay, the ray interactor we will still use next week, right? So for now, just convert one to a direct interactor. Okay, so right now I'll just go over to Unity. I will show you how to set all of that up so that we have a direct interactor. Okay, so I will head over to Unity. Just give me a second. Okay, so this is my scene right now. Okay, so I've just made a few changes. One, I've just put this other white cube here to act as a table. Okay, and then my grab interactable, I've made it into this shape, sort of like a cup kind of shape. All right, and then everything else is about the same. Just have this plane to act as my ground, and I have my XR origin and device simulator. Okay, so before I demo how to how to do the direct interactor, I'll just show you what we have from last week first. So let me maximize this. Okay, so last week we had this, right? We had our camera that we can move with our right click, right? You hold right click, move your mouse, you can move your head. Here I can zoom in and zoom out to move my head forward and back. And then to move my hands, I have I have to hold left shift or space bar, right? Okay, hang on. Okay. Okay, so my XR origin was missing this. Let me just link it up. Okay. Okay, maximize this again. Okay. Okay, so last week we had this, move our head and move our hands. Right, this is my left hand. I'm holding left shift now, and then space bar, I'm moving my right hand. Right, so I was saying that these lines that you see here, these are the ray casts. Right, so let's try and aim our hand at this cup here. So I'll use my left hand. So I'll hold left shift. Okay, then you can see that once I hit the cup, okay, my ray becomes white color and I can pick it up. Okay, but let me just show you why we might not want this. So right now I'm relatively close to it. So let me move like further away. Okay, let me say move until here, and then I'll move my hand further away also. Okay, so right now, imagine if I was your player, right, and this is your game, and maybe your objective is for me to pick up the cup, right? And then if I was this far away and I could just pick up the cup because I'm using ray casting like this, okay, then your game would last maybe like 10 seconds because I can just pick it up quickly like this, even though it's far away, right? So it wouldn't make much sense if we let the players just use raycasting to interact with everything because they would just stay in one spot, right? They wouldn't move around and explore your surroundings. They would just stay one spot, use raycast and do everything. So that might not be what we want. Okay, so let's see how we can implement our direct interactor. Okay, so for this demo, I will choose to use my right hand controller. I will convert this into a direct interactor. Okay, so first we will go to camera offset, right click, and then XR and choose direct interactor action based. Alright, so make sure you choose direct interaction action based. Alright, so once you do that, there will be this new direct interactor object here. Over here. Okay, then I was talking about the controller, right? The copy component and then paste values one. Okay, so why we need to do that? Okay, so if you go to the direct interactor, you look at this XR controller, okay, you'll see that all these actions here, everything is not linked, right? Compare it to what we have in our right hand controller. You can see that here everything is linked properly to all our input. Okay, so if we were to try and use this direct interactor now, it would not react to us at all. Okay, so what we need to do, go to right hand controller, click on the meatballs, copy, okay, then go to the direct interactor, meatballs again, and then just paste component values. Okay, don't paste as new, paste component values. Okay, this is the one you want to choose. Okay, so just click on that. And then you'll see that everything that was on our right hand is now here in the new controller, in the new controller. All right, so this right hand controller, we don't need it anymore. I'm just gonna delete it. Okay, then this is my this is gonna be my new right hand. So I just say this is my new right hand. Okay, so what that achieves is now when I press play, or rather I shouldn't press play first. Let me just show you the collider. Okay, so this new right hand, if I were to, let's look at the inspector first. Okay, after this controller is pasted with all the right values, I'm going to minimize it. Okay, you'll notice that I also have this sphere collider component here. Okay, so if I were to zoom in on the right hand, okay, you'll see that this green outline, okay, is actually showing the sphere collider component here. Right, so this green outline here, this is basically your hand right now. Okay, this will show you the sort of the range that your hand can interact with objects. Okay, so right now it's invisible. Okay, so later when we press play, it will be invisible. That makes it a bit hard to see. Okay, so I'm just going to right click and I'm going to add a 3D sphere to it. Okay, so that I can just see where my hand is at the moment. Okay, so once I create the sphere, it's a 1 meter by 1 meter sphere. So it's a bit too big. I'm going to reduce it to 0.1. Okay, and then the default sphere that we choose to create, right? It also comes with a sphere collider. So I'm just going to remove that. I don't need it. Okay, I only want this sphere for the visuals so that I can track my hand. Okay, so right now it's a bit small. Okay, so I will increase it a bit. 0.2 should be okay. So let me see. Yeah, okay, so 0.2 sphere size for the scale works well. Okay, so now I'm going to press play. And let me maximize the window. Okay, so let me just move my head first. Okay, so here I can see my sphere right now. Okay, so once again, if I hold left shift and I move my mouse, okay, this is my left hand. All right, and then if I were to hold space right now, okay, so I can move my right hand, which is this sphere. Right, so you can see there's no more ray cast anymore. Okay, so if I were to try and pick up this cup with my, let's say, right hand, okay, so let me move my right hand up, okay, then move it toward the cup. Okay, just let me see whether I'm there yet. So now my hand is intersecting with the cup. Okay, so right now if I were to try and sort of point it at the cup and press G, you can see that I can't pick up the cup anymore. Right, so my sphere, which is my hand, has to physically touch the cup. Then I press G. Okay, then you can see that now I can pick up the cup. Okay, then I can put it down. I can move my hand around. Okay, if I try to press G at a distance, okay, nothing is happening. I have to go and touch it. Then now I can pick up the cup. I can do whatever I want with it. Then I can just throw it away. Alright, so that is how we can implement a direct interactor onto our hand instead of using a ray interactor. Okay, so once again, because ray interactors, we allow the players to do things from a distance using ray casting. So that might not be what we want in our applications because our players might just stay in one spot and do everything from that one spot instead of going around exploring the environment. Okay, so that's why we use this direct interactor, and it is how we can implement it in our project. All right, so at this point, if anyone has any questions or can't keep up, just let me know in the chat, or you can unmute and let me know. Okay, so maybe I just pause here for a while. I see whether anyone got any questions. Okay, then I will move on with the lesson. Okay, also if you have any steps you want me to repeat, you can also just let me know again. Okay, so just pause a bit, make sure everyone's okay, then I'll move on.
Sorry, Mr. Elias, for the question. I actually mapped the direct interactor controller to the left hand instead. How do I grab on the left hand again? I don't remember. Is it also G?
Yes, for the left hand it's also G, but you just have to make sure you're holding left shift while you press G.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else with questions?
Well, I asked that question because I'm able to grab the object for some reason.
Sorry, what do you say?
I'm unable to grab the object.
Even while holding left shift
Yeah.
and you're colliding with the object.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can show your screen so I can help you.
I see. I see. Give me a second. So this is the what I'm using right now. I'm pressing G at the moment, and nothing seems to be happening.
Okay. Right, it's a very good start. It's a very basic kind of interaction. Okay, but what if we want other forms of interaction? What if we want to create something like a switch, or what if we want to create something where we can pick it up and use it to hit stuff? Right, to implement other behaviors into our interactable objects, okay, we can use the event-based system of an interactable. Okay, so these events, they can actually be found in your interactables, but it's usually at the bottom of the component. Okay, so if you look at my laser pointer here, okay, the XR grab interactable, if you look all the way down, you should see something called interactable events, right? Okay, then there's also another component called the XR simple interactable. Okay, later we'll be talking about this. Okay, if you look down, there's also an interactable events. Right, so if you were to expand that property, okay, you'll see that there are a lot of different events. Okay, you review several events. Okay, so these events over here, okay, they are, if you look at the name, okay, you look at the, or generally the UI, okay, you'll see that they're actually quite similar to what we have been dealing with when we use our buttons, right? So just a small refresher for the buttons. When we have a button, we want to link it to a function. We just go to the UI button, we click the plus sign here, and then we drag and drop, right? So the logic is the same here for these simple, or rather for these interactable events. Right, so we will also just click this plus sign. Okay, then after that we can drag and drop the object whose function we want to call. Right, so this lets us quickly link our own code and our own behaviors to VR events. All right, so let's use these events. Okay, let's try and quickly create a highlighting effect, okay, for our interactables to display whether or not they are hovered over or not. Okay, so in your project, okay, create a new C# script, okay, and then name it interactable highlight. Okay, then open the script in your Visual Studio, and then create two functions that we will, or rather that you will link to those events later. Alright, so in the onHover function, okay, we will look for the materials in our object, okay, in our 3D object, okay, and we will turn on the emission property. Okay, so the emission property, it controls whether your material emits light or not. Okay, it will also control what color the light being emitted is. Okay, so we'll use this emission property, and we will use it to make our objects highlight themselves. Okay, so the goal here is whenever we hover over the object, meaning either our raycast hits it or our hand physically touches the object, we want it to highlight so that our users will know that, oh, I'm I'm able to interact with this object. Okay, so we will do that for the onHover function. Then of course, we have to reverse that as well. Okay, if not, the object will just forever be highlighted. So in the exit hover function, okay, we will copy paste the same code, okay, but instead of enabling the emission property, we will disable the property instead. Okay, so that will sort of turn off the highlight. Okay, so once both our functions are set up in Visual Studio, okay, then we can drag this new class from our project into the inspector window of our object. Okay, then that will add it as a component. Okay, then we can finally link those two functions in our first and last hover events of the object. All right, so don't worry if you are not sure how to follow or not sure what to type, right? We will tackle this in the demo. Okay, so what I want everyone to do is first create your new C# script, call it interactable highlight. Okay, then open it in Visual Studio. Okay, so do that first. Okay, while I switch over to sharing my Unity and Visual Studio screen. All right, so here I'm back in my Unity project. Okay, so let's start creating this object highlighting. Okay, so I will right click in my scripts folder. Right now I have nothing here. So I'll right click, create C# script, and I'll name this interactable highlight. Right, so once that is created, I will open this in my Visual Studio. Okay, so just let this in. Okay, hang on. Okay, so I need to share my whole screen. Okay. Alright, so I've created my interactable highlight. So now I'll go over to Visual Studio. So just double click this. Okay, reload. Okay, just let it reload a bit. Okay. Alright, so this interactable highlight class that I have over here, what I want this class to do is highlight my objects. Alright, so I will delete these two, start and update. I don't need them. Okay, what I want are two functions, public void onHover, okay, and then another public void exit hover. What I want these functions to do, I will just leave some comments here. So this will highlight using emission property. Then this function here will stop highlighting object. Okay, so in the onHover function, what I first, let me zoom in some more in case. Okay, so in the onHover function, what I want to do, I will just do my comments first. Okay, so here in my onHover, I will say that, okay, I want to get all the mesh renderers. Okay, then after I get all the mesh renderers, what I will want to do is, I will want to go through all the renderers and turn on the emission property in each material. So this is what I want to do in this function. First, I want to get all my mesh renderers, and then after that, I want to go through each renderer, look for the material in each renderer, and then turn on the emission property. Okay, so what I'll, or rather how I will do that is, firstly, get all the mesh renderers. So I can just say get component. Oh, sorry, not get component, sorry. So I will say get components in children. All right, so why I want to use get components in children is because if I were to go back to Unity, okay, let it reload. If I were to go back to Unity and I show you this cup over here, you can see that this cup that I have here is actually made up of two cubes, right? And then one of the cubes, okay, this bigger cube here is actually a child of my smaller cube. Okay, so this smaller cube is acting sort of like the handle, and then this is my the cup itself, right? So you can see that this handle is my grab interactable. This is where I actually grab the cup from. Okay, so if I were to not use get components in children, okay, then this cube over here, this larger cube here, will not be highlighted later. Okay, only my handle here will be highlighted, okay, which is not what we want, right? We will want everything to be highlighted, right? So even if, let's say this is this cup over here, let's say I want to add more stuff. Let's say I want to add like a sphere. Okay, it kind of looks like an egg. Okay, let me just adjust a bit. So let's say like now my cup has this scoop of ice cream on it. Right, it has this scoop of ice cream on it. Right, so when my player hovers over this cup, I will also want this scoop of ice cream to highlight. Right, if it doesn't highlight, then it won't feel like it's part of the object. Right, so that's why we want to use get components in children. Okay, so this, okay, I'll just delete this away. We don't need this now. Okay, so we will, that's why we want to use our get components in children. Okay, so I'll go back to my scripting again. Okay, let me just type this out. Get components in children. Okay, so what is, or rather, what is the component that we want to get? We want to get the mesh renderer. So you can see that we use these get components in children. And then we were to mouse over this, you can see that it will actually give us an array of mesh renderers. Right, it gives us an array of mesh renderers. So we must store it somewhere. Okay, so we have to store it inside similarly a mesh renderer array. So I'll just name this mesh renderers equals get components in children mesh renderer. Right, so what this does is I tell my object, okay, go and look through all your children, okay, including yourself. Okay, go and look through all of those objects and look for a mesh renderer component. Okay, so once you do all of that, I want you to store all of those mesh renderers that you found, store it inside this array over here called mesh renderers that I just created. Right, so that's how we get all our mesh renderers, which is this command that we have just achieved. Okay, so now let's look at the second command, and then how we want to implement this feature here. So now we want to go through all of the renderers, okay, and then we want to turn on the emission property. Okay, so we want to go through all the renderers. So just nice, all our renderers are inside an array. So we want to go through an array, we can use a for loop. Right, so during our AR lessons, we talked about the for each loop. Okay, so I'm going to use that here instead of our regular for loop. So I'll just say for each mesh renderer, and I'll just call this renderer. in mesh renderers. Okay, so for each mesh renderer that is inside our mesh renderer array, okay, I want to do something. So this is where I will turn on. This is where I will turn on the emission property. Okay, so how I'll do that is I will just say renderer dot material dot enable keyword. Okay, then I will pass in the name of the property I want to enable. So in this case, it is underscore and then all caps emission. Right, like that. Okay, so of course you can refer to the slides for the code if you need to. So I have achieved what I want to do for this function here. Okay, so let's just go through it quickly. So this function on hover, okay, it will highlight the object using the emission property. So what I want to do in this function is first, I get all the mesh renderers. And how I do that is I use this function here, get components in children. So when I use this function, I tell my object that, okay, look through all of your children, look for mesh renderers in all of them. Once you have looked through everything, store them inside this array here called mesh renderers. And after that, I want to go through all of these renderers and I want to turn on the emission property. So I use a for each loop. I will loop through this array over here. Okay, and then I will tell the renderer to turn on its to go to its material and turn on the emission property. Okay, so let me just make sure I save this properly. Okay, then I will head back to Unity. Alright, so here in Unity, you'll notice that my cup here is not the default material. Right, and that's because the default material, it does not have any settings in its emission. Okay, so what you can do is you go to your materials folder. You should have one by now because we've created the ground material last week. Oops. Okay. So here you can create a new material. So I'll just create one as well. Create a new material. I'll just name this new cup. Okay, then if you look at the inspector here, at the new cup material, okay, you can change the color and all, but there's now this emission setting. Right, so this emission setting, you'll see that it's a checkbox. Okay, so when we enable and disable it later, what is happening is we are just essentially checking this, unchecking this, checking this, unchecking this. Right, so if you were to check this, okay, you'll see that there's this color over here. Okay, so right, first let me assign it to the cup. Okay, so let me just drag and drop it here. Okay, so right now it's just white color. So I will change my cup color, let's say to a blue color. Okay, to this kind of blue. Okay. So right now it's not emitting any light, it's not emitting any color. And so how we can change that is using this emission over here. So as I was saying, we are just going to check and uncheck this later. So if you see this color field over here, you can click it. Okay, then you can choose what color you want your material to emit. So right now it's black, so nothing will be emitted. But if I were to shift it, okay, you can see that my color changes. Right, according to essentially blending whatever color we choose here with our main color up here. So we can just go ahead and choose whatever color you like. So I'm gonna just choose like maybe a yellow color so that it will blend into this green color here. Okay, so maybe that's a bit too bright. Okay, so maybe I'll do something like this. Okay, so you can just choose your own color, what you need to blend into, right? So just choose what you like. Okay, so now when we uncheck this emission, here you can see it goes back to its usual blue color. When we check it, it becomes this highlighted green color, right? So this is what we should see later. Okay, so let me just save again. Okay, remember to save regularly. You don't need to crash. Okay, so now what we can do is we go to the cube. Okay, then I'll go to my scripts folder, and now I will drag and drop this script that I've just created. I will drag and drop it here. Okay, so I'll drop it here, make it a component. Okay, so what I want to happen now is whenever my player hovers over this object, I will want my object to highlight. Okay, so the hover is up here. Let me just minus this away. Okay, so right now you'll see that these interactable events here, okay, the list, everything is empty. Right? Everything is empty. So let's change that. Okay, so I will use the first and last hover. Okay, so I will add this. Okay, just click on the plus button. Okay, so right now there's none. So what I'll do is I will drag myself, my own cube in. Okay, then the function, I will link it to my interactable highlight. And then the function I want to call is my on hover. Okay, so let me just repeat again. Right, in the first hover entered event, up here, the first one, click on the plus icon. Okay, then there is, right now there's none, no object linked to it. So I will just link myself, and the function I will look for interactable highlight on hover. Okay, so if you don't see this interactable highlight over here, this option here, okay, then probably you have not added your component down here. Okay, so just remember to drag it here and drop it here in the inspector. Okay, so now let's play, and then let's see whether that works. All right. Okay, press play. Okay, so let's just use the scene window here. It will be easier for us to see. Okay, so let me try and move my sphere here. Okay, then I will. Okay, so you can see that once my sphere touches the cube, okay, it turns into this green color. Okay, but you see that now what I'm missing is when I move my hand away, okay, it does not change back to its original blue color. Right, so let's now work on that part, right? The exiting hover part. And so we'll go back to Visual Studio. Okay, then you'll see in my exit hover, I don't have anything yet. Okay, so what I'll do is I can just select all of these, copy, then I will paste it here. Okay, so why I can paste it here is because the logic is, well, more or less entirely the same. Right, I will want to get all the mesh renderers. I will want to go through the renderers array. Okay, but this time I want to turn off the property. Okay, so I'll just change my comments here, turn off and turn off here. Okay, so in order to turn off the property, instead of saying enable keyword, I will say disable keyword. Okay, so that's all you need to change. Right, we compare it to the top. Okay, the top is enable keyword emission. Okay, but down here we just disable keyword emission. Right, so this will cause our cup to stop highlighting. So once we have this function set up, what we need to do is we go back to Unity. Okay, then we need to link it to our event. So right now we only have this hover entered. Okay, now we are missing this hover exited. Okay, so I will just click on the plus again. Okay, then same thing, I will drag my cube in. Then I'll look for the interactable highlight. But this time I'll look for exit hover. Okay, so exit hover, I'll link it here. Okay, so now when I press play, okay, we should see that when our hand stops intersecting with the cup, it should turn back to this blue color that we have. Okay, so let me move the hand. Okay, then let's just start here first. Okay, so as I move my hand closer, okay, once I touch my cup, okay, it highlights to this green color. Okay, then when I move my hand away, okay, you can see that it goes back to its normal blue color. Okay, so once again, intersect it, becomes green, it highlights, and then I move away, it becomes blue again. Okay, this is a very basic highlighting kind of effect. What happens if I pick it up? Okay, if I pick it up, okay, it still remains green color. Then when I drop it, it becomes blue color. So why it's still green color when I pick it up already? Okay, it's because it is still sort of intersecting with my head, right? So why, or rather not why, but how we want to work around this is you go back to your cube again. Okay, scroll down to the events. Okay, so there is something here called select. Okay, select. So what you want to do is this select entered. Okay, this event will happen whenever we try to grab our object. Okay, whenever we try to press G, or if you have the headset, whenever you try to press the grip button, okay, this select event will happen. So let's make it such that whenever our cube is selected or when it is picked up, okay, the highlight will also turn itself off. So this select entered, I will also plus. Then same thing, same pattern. I will just drag my cube in and I'll look for interactable highlight, exit, hover. Okay, so what that has accomplished is whenever my cube is picked up, I will also call this exit hover function. Okay, so let's see whether this works. Okay, so just now you saw that when I picked up my cup, it remained green color. So let's see whether it changes now. Okay, give it some time. All right. Okay, so I move my hand. Okay, move towards the cup. So the highlighting still works normally. Okay, I can still highlight it like this. Now let's try and pick it up. Okay, so now when I pick it up, just now it was green color, right? So now when I pick it up, it becomes blue color, which is what we want. You can see that it's all blue. Then now when I drop it, and then I hover over it again, okay, then it goes back to its normal behavior again. Pick it up, it's blue. Okay, then let me just put it down. Okay, hover over it, it's green color. Okay. So just like that, we've created a very simple highlighting effect for our grabbing interactable. Okay, and when our object is grabbed, it will also stop highlighting itself. Okay, so let me just show you again the highlight event. Here I will take a quick screenshot. Okay, I'll just take a quick screenshot of what I linked, then I will paste it in our chat. Okay, so you all can refer to it. Here the code itself, you all can refer on the slides. Okay. Alright, so at this point, anyone got any questions or any steps you want me to repeat? You just let me know, either unmute and let me know, or you can just type in the chat. Alright, so once again, I'll just pause here a bit, okay, and then see whether anyone has any issues.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the script, is it you put it inside another cube inside, or?
Okay, so the script, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I put it at the same object as my interactable.
Is it the last week one, sure, or?
Yeah, the last week one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then just make sure you also create a new material for the object.
Sure, because when I put the script inside the last week cube, right, it didn't show the interactable events. Oh wait. Oh wait, sure, no, I found it. I found it.
Okay. Okay, so I just pause here for a while, let you all try it out. Okay, any questions, just let me know again. Okay, so if no questions, let's just pause here for maybe a 5-minute break. It's just you know, highlighting stuff. Okay, we can use these events to implement more functionality. Okay, so just now we saw how we use the select enter event to call a function, okay, to call our exit hover function, right? So our object stops highlighting after we pick it up. Okay, so similarly, we can use that select enter event. Here we can create something like a switch, right? We can, whenever our users goes forward and then tries to interact using the grip button, here we can use it to call a function and create something like a switch. Okay, so let's just quickly see how we use that to create something like a light switch. Okay, so first create something, a new 3D object. Okay, so just treat that as your switch object that you will interact with later. All right, then select that object, go to its inspector. You know, this time go to add component and then add a XR simple interactable. Okay, XR simple interactable. Okay, so why we want to use the XR simple is because if we were to use the grab interactable, then whenever our users go to the object, they try to press the grip button, they try to select the object, okay, they will by default pick up the object. Okay, that is just because of the grab interactable. Right, so just by default, it will pick up the object. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want our users or players to just pick up our switches and then run around with it, right? So we want to, instead of using a grab interactable, we use the simple interactable. Okay, so the simple interactable won't be grabbed, they won't really be able to manipulate it unless we allow them to. Okay, so once you've added the XR simple interactable, you just take note, you should add a body as well. Okay, add a rigid body. So this rigid body, you can make it kinematic if you don't want physics. Okay. So once you've done this, we will create a new C# script, okay, and we can name it light switch. Okay, so once you have this new script, okay, you can drag it into the inspector of your object, okay, to add it as a component. Okay, just in case we forget about it later, we can just add it first. All right, so once that is done, you can open the open the light switch class in your Visual Studio. Okay, then from there you will create a public light variable and then a public function called toggle light. Okay, so your code should look like this at this stage. Okay, you'll have a public class. Inside you have this public light variable and then this public function called toggle light. So we will drag and drop the light that we want to toggle later back in Unity. Okay, and then where will we drag and drop it into? It will be this public light variable. Okay, so just refresher, when you have a public variable, it becomes exposed in your inspector, right? So that means we can drag and drop stuff in later. And then in the toggle light function, okay, we will just set the enabled property of the light variable to the opposite of its current value. Right, so how we do that is we have this, we just say light to toggle dot enable equals to exclamation light to toggle dot enable. Okay, so this is just flipping our boolean. Okay, so later I will just talk a bit about this more in our demo. Okay, then once you have your function set up, okay, we can do the linking again to the event. So back in the scene, link just drag and drop a light into the public variable. Right, so for this example, I'll just use the directional light, the default one that's created in every new scene. So once you drag and drop here, okay, then you can link it to the interactable event, okay, the select entered event. Okay, so whenever our object is selected, it will call the toggle light function and our light should turn off. Okay, so let's head into our demo. Okay, so let me just go back to Unity. So back in Unity now. Okay, so I'm going to create my switch object first. So I'm just going to create a capsule, something a bit different. Okay, so right now it's too big, of course, so I will reduce it. So 0.2 maybe. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so let's just say 0.2. Okay, so this capsule over here is going to be my switch. Okay, so what I want to do now is I will add my components first. So with the switch, I'll just name this as well. I'll just say this is my light switch. Okay, make it clearer. Okay, I'll just name this light switch. So then I'll go to inspector, add component. Okay, I'll add my simple interactable. Okay, so just search for simple. Okay, so if you look at the simple interactable, it has more or less the same stuff as your grab interactable. Okay, just a few lesser things. Let me just compare. Okay, so your grab interactable, okay, has all these other variables here that pertain to the grabbing action. Okay, compared to your simple interactable, okay, nothing much here. Okay, because it doesn't allow itself to be picked up or manipulated in any way. It just exists there. Okay. Then we look at the interactable events. It has all the same stuff. Here, hover, first slash last hover, the normal hover, then select, activate, etc. Okay, so other than this simple interactable, okay, so in the slides I talked about the kinematic setting, which is this is kinematic. We'll just control whether our object reacts to physics or not. Okay, so let me just give a small refresher here in case you've forgotten. Let me play. Okay, so you will see that once I play now, my cube should fall, my switch should fall. It should land onto the table. So you see, if I try to lift it up, okay, it will fall, it will topple over. Okay, but if I were to change this to is kinematic, okay, I check the box there, I lift it up, okay, it doesn't really react anymore, right? It doesn't react to gravity, it doesn't react to any physics. But if I were to turn this off again, okay, you see that gravity has its usual effect again. Alright, so if your switch or your interactable is not meant to be moved, okay, you can just have your rigid body be kinematic. So in my case, I don't want my switch to move around or react to gravity, so I will just check this box over here. Alright, so with that done, and I'll name this like switch. Okay, Okay, it immediately opened my Visual Studio. So let's do that. Let me look for the script. Okay, so this is what the script looks like now in Visual Studio. Okay, no functions. Okay, the functions are, or rather the functions are empty. Right, so this start and this update, I don't need them now. I'll delete them away. Okay, so what I'll do is I want to have a public light variable, and I'll name this light to toggle. Okay, so this is the variable that we will drag and drop in Unity later. Okay, then I'll create a new public function, public void. I'll just name this toggle light. Okay, so same thing, I'm going to start with my comments. So here, this function, this will turn on / off the light to toggle. Okay, so that's what I want this function to do. Okay, so what I'll do is I will same thing, comment again. So I'll just say set the enabled bool to its opposite value. Okay, so just a quick explanation, what is this enabled bool? Okay, so in order to see what this enabled is, let's go back to Unity. Unity. Okay, this enabled bool is actually, where's my light? Up here. Okay, the enabled bool is actually this checkbox over here. Right, so by disabling it, okay, my light will turn off. Enable, it will turn on. Okay, so turn off, turn on, turn off, turn on. Okay, so that is the effect that we want to have, that we want to achieve with this light switch over here. Okay, so back to Unity, back to Visual Studio. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll say light to toggle dot enable equals to exclamation light to toggle, light to toggle dot enable. Right, so this exclamation here, okay, we've actually dealt with this in our AR lessons as well. Okay, so this exclamation here will effectively flip any boolean that we put after the exclamation. So what this means is if light to enable, light to toggle dot enable right now is true, okay, this exclamation will flip it and it will become false. Okay, so then this will become false. And then on the other hand, if light to toggle right now dot enable is false, this exclamation will flip it back to true, and then our light will turn on. Okay, so simple as that, we will have a function that can flip this enabled boolean to true and to false. Okay, and that in effect will turn on and off our light in the scene. Okay, so I'll go back to Unity now, then let's do our linking of this function to the event. Okay, so let me go to my light switch. All right, so what we want to do is that function that we just written. Okay, we want to link it to this select entered, right? So effectively, whenever our hand reaches for this object and then we press the grip button, we want to turn on and off the light. So we add the function here. We want to add it here in this select event. Okay, so we press the plus icon, okay, but we don't have anything to add yet, okay, because the light switch has not been added as a component. Okay, so make sure you just drag it and drop it in. Okay, you can drag it before or after the rigid body, doesn't really matter. Okay, just drop it in. Okay, so if I were to expand the light switch, okay, right now light to toggle is none. Right, so let's fix that. Let's make sure we drag and drop our directional light in, okay, so that it doesn't give us any errors. Okay, if this is none, it will definitely throw us an error later. All right, so what we want to do now is we want to link the function inside this component here, this light switch component. We want to link it up in this select event. So I'll just drag my light switch in here. Then I'll look for the light switch class, and I'll look for the toggle light function. Okay, so with all of that linked up properly, with our light to toggle linked and our toggle light function being called over here, okay, now I can press play and then let's see whether this works. Okay, so let me move my hand. Okay, where's my hand? Okay. Don't really see my hand. Okay, so that's my hand. So if I hover over it, then now if I try to press G, maybe I'm not hovering over. Yes, okay. So perspective errors, I can't tell whether my hand is touching it. All right, so let me move it a bit. So, okay, it looks like it's definitely intersecting now. Okay, so now if I press G, okay, you can see that my toggle light function is called and I turn off my light. Then if I were to press G again while it's intersecting, okay, my light turns on again. Okay, so just like that, I've created a very simple light switch. So of course, just for this demo, it's just something very simple. Okay, but if you want to have more advanced behaviors, you want some animations to play, you want something to happen in your scene, okay, you can do that. You just have to code it out in your function and then call the function here in your select event. Alright, so just now you saw that I was struggling a bit to get my sphere to intersect. Okay, and I also couldn't really tell whether it was intersecting properly. Okay, so that's where the highlighting comes in. Right, so the highlighting script that we just created just now is actually quite plug and play in the sense that if I have a new object like this light switch, okay, I can also um, or I can also implement this highlight here as well. So same thing, I can just drag and drop this interactable highlight here. Okay, then inside the first and last hover, okay, I will just do that again. Okay, just press the plus icon. And then now I will just link it up. Okay, then the light switch, not the light switch class, sorry, the interactable highlight class, I'll look for on hover. Interactable highlight, look for exit hover. Okay, so now what's left is I just need to make sure that my material has the emission property. So this default one doesn't have. Okay, so I'm just going to give it the new cup material as well. Okay, I give it a new cup material. So now when I play, okay, then I try to move my hand to the switch. Okay, now it's highlighting my cup. Okay, so now you can see that my switch also has this highlighting effect. Then this still has its functionality. I press G, turn off the light, turn on, turn off, turn on. Alright, so this interactable highlight script, okay, we can actually use it on most of our interactable objects, right? We just have to drag it in as a component, we link it to our first and last hover, okay, and then we just make sure that the material has an emission property. Alright, so just a very quick plug and play kind of thing. Alright, and then for the light switch itself, just make sure you link the toggle light function in this select event over here. Okay, and then in your light switch component, make sure you are linking the light that you want to turn on and off. Okay, if not, you'll run into some errors. Okay, so same thing, I'll just pause here a bit. So if you have any issues, okay, just type it out in the chat or unmute and let me know. Okay, so just pause here for a minute or two and let you try it out.
So Mr. Elias, I'm not exactly sure where I messed up this time, but none of the functions that you described are working.
Okay.
Like even the interactable script, like the interactable hover, that thing isn't working either. I think it may have to do with the conditions, but I'm not able to determine.
So your switch, do you have a rigid body added to it?
Oh, it needs to have a rigid body.
Yep.
Oh, guess that could be part of the reason. Let me try it again.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
So for the when I put the light switch script inside my the 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 simple interactable XR Archer, how come that when I put inside right the function doesn't it only doesn't let me like select the light switch.
You have to, okay, so the steps is the light switch you must drag to your object first. You must add it as a component.
I did that already, sure.
And then after that, you drag the object in, not the script.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah.
Okay, actually working now. Fantastic.
Okay, any other issues? Just let me know. Okay, so if there are no other questions, no other issues, then I will move on to the last part of our lesson, which is using something called socket interactors. So let me just share my slides again. Okay. Okay, so when it comes to our VR experiences, there might be times when we want our objects to snap to a certain position. Okay, so think about something like if you have a chair and then you have a table, you want it to snap into a certain position, right, to make it look neat. Okay, that might be one case. Okay, or maybe your application or your game might be some kind of training simulator. You have a toolbox. Okay, then you can take a lot of tools out of the toolbox, right? Then you want to let your players put them back properly. Okay, that might be some case where you want to have some kind of snapping. Right, in order to achieve these kind of behaviors, okay, we don't really have to code much things. Okay, we can just use something called a socket interactor. Okay, so when we add this socket interactor component to a object, okay, what it does is it will look for any interactable that is quote unquote free, meaning it is not grabbed or it is not assigned to another socket interactor. So meaning anything that is just out there in the world. Okay, so this socket interactor, once it finds any free interactables, okay, it will snap the interactable to it. Alright, so when it comes to interactables that are being grabbed, okay, the socket interactor will still detect them, okay, but it won't snap them into place. Okay, it will only snap them into place when the player releases releases the object. Right, so let's just take a look at how we can create this socket interactor. So to add one to your scene, okay, right click in your hierarchy, right, and then select XR and then socket interactor. Okay, you will see the socket interactor option up here. So a socket interactor object will then be added into your hierarchy. Okay, and then if you look through the inspector of this object, you will see a transform component, you will see a sphere collider component, and then you'll see a socket interactor component. Right, so this, I will talk about this sphere collider component first. Okay, so this sphere collider is what your socket will use to detect objects. So very similar to what we were dealing with just now with our direct interactor. Right, this collider will just look for objects that intersect it. Right, so that's how the socket interactor works. Okay, so let's talk about the socket interactor itself. Okay, this component has quite a few different properties, right? But we will only look at a few key properties. Okay, so the first one we want to look at is interaction layer mask. Let me just turn on laser pointer. Okay, so this interaction layer mask over here on the image, interaction layer mask. Right, so this property, it controls which layers will be detected by the socket interactor. All right, so only objects on the selected layer will be detected. Okay, so this is actually useful for creating socket interactors that will only snap certain objects. Right, so let's say you want to have, or let's think about the toolbox example again. So maybe this toolbox has like screwdriver, has a hammer, has a spanner, has some pliers, right? So you have one slot for each of those equipment. So let's say your player takes out the screwdriver and then you want them to put it back in the screwdriver slot. Okay, you can create a screwdriver layer. So by creating a layer, that socket will only detect screwdrivers. So if you try and put a hammer there, your socket will reject it. Okay, it won't even detect it actually. Yeah. Okay, so this interaction layer mask will be useful for creating sockets that are quote unquote selective, right? They don't let every object snap to it. So if you look at this image over here in the slide, okay, right now by default it should say everything. So what that means is any object, any interactable object, if it comes into contact with this socket, it will just be snapped, right? Any object at all. And then next we have this attach transform. Right, so this property will control where your object snaps to. Right, so if you leave it as none right now, if you leave it as none, then by default, your object will just snap to the socket. But let's say you want to have some kind of offset, or maybe you want your object to face a certain direction. Okay, then you can control it by using this attach transform. Okay, so maybe it's a bit hard to visualize now, but later in the demo, I will just show you guys how we can set all this up. Okay, and then the last two properties you want to look at, talk about, is this hover mesh material and can't hover mesh material. So whenever we have our interactable touch a socket interactor, okay, we want to know that, okay, there's actually a socket interactor. So this mesh, hover mesh material will actually let us know that our object, our interactable, can go into this socket. Okay, and then the can't hover mesh material will let us know when we cannot put this interactable into this socket. All right, so just you can create two different materials here. So maybe typically the can hover one is usually green, and then the cannot hover usually is something like red or some kind of negative kind of color. All right, so aside from all of these properties, your socket interactor will also contain events that can be used to link to your other functions. Right, so if you look down there, you'll see the interactor events, and then you also see the hover and the select events. Right, so the hover events will be triggered the same way as the grab and simple interactables. Right, so whenever an object is hovering over it, you can call a function. Same thing as the select. Okay, so the select events will happen when an item is snapped to the socket or is removed from the socket. So same thing, you can just call your functions here if you want something to happen. So for example, maybe not sure if you have heard of the sword in the stone legend, right? So let's say there's a sword in a stone in your project, and then you let your players remove the sword from the stone. Okay, and then you want something to happen, like a landslide happens or enemies pop up, things like that. So the stone could be a socket, then the sword would just be a normal interactable. So when the sword is removed from the socket, you can link a function to this select exited, and then you can call the function, and you can have whatever you want to happen inside that function happen. Right, so that's how we can make use of this socket interactor and its events. Okay, so I'll go into the demo right now, okay, then show you quickly how we can set up this socket interactor to create snapping events, or rather snapping interaction. Okay, so let me just go back to my Unity window again. Okay, all right. Okay, so this light switch over here, let me just move it away first, then move it towards the back. Okay, so what I'll do here is I will right click. I want to create a socket interactor now, so I'll right click XR and then select socket interactor. Okay, then a new socket interactor will be created here. Right, so let's select this. Okay, then let's go look at the inspector. Okay, so just minimize this first. So you'll see a transform, a sphere collider, and a socket interactor. Okay, so let's just look at the sphere collider first. Let me expand this. Okay, then if we were to zoom in on the socket interactor, okay, right now you can't see because it's against this white background. Let me move it out. Okay, so you can see that this socket interactor right now has this green outline once again, which corresponds to our sphere collider. Right, so this is essentially the detection area of our socket. So if you, let's say you want to increase this, want to make it such that this socket can detect a larger area, we can just increase the radius of our sphere collider. Okay, so if we make it this big, then any interactable that comes into this area will snap to this socket. Okay, so for this demo, I won't do that. I'll just keep it as the usual 0.1, the default 0.1. Okay, so anything that comes into this area here will be snapped. Okay, so I will just put it somewhere here. Yeah, I will just put it at this corner of my cube. Okay, like that. Right, so that is where I put my socket. And then let's look at the component itself. Okay, so the first thing we have here is the interaction layer mask that I was talking about just now. So right now it says everything. So let's click on that. Okay, then you can see that there are only a few choices here because by default there aren't that many layers. So there's nothing, everything, and default. Okay, so these layers over here correspond directly to the layer up here. Okay, the layer up here in your inspector. So right now you have all of these, right? So you won't see the all of these here, these transparent effects, ignore raycast, all of this, okay? Because that is the Unity default layers, right? So we won't see them. But if you want to have our own layers, what we can do is from layer, we can add layer here. Okay, then we can see all of these empty spaces. We can define our layers. Okay, so we can see just now I was saying that the ones that we didn't see are the built-in layers, right? So these layers, we won't see them there. Okay, but right now, I'll just leave it as everything. Okay, later, then we take a look at how we can implement a more selective kind of socket. Okay, and then we have the attach transform. Okay, right now, I'll just leave it as none first. Okay, I'll just leave it as none for now. Okay, what I want to focus on first is this hover mesh material and can't hover mesh material. Right, so I'm going to create some new materials for this. So I'll create material. Okay, so I'll just name this hover, or rather attach material. Okay, so when my object can attach, okay, I will make it be a green color. Okay, maybe something like this. Okay, turn down the smoothness. All right, so for these kinds of highlighting, right, for these kinds of materials, usually they will come with some transparency, right? You won't just see it become a opaque green color there, green color object. Okay, so how we can change that is rendering mode. Instead of opaque, we can choose transparent. Okay, and then if you go to the color again, okay, you can see that now I can control the transparency of it, okay, through the alpha channel. Okay, you can control the transparency. Let me this. Okay, so you can see the preview over here. Right, if I were to make it fully transparent, you can see that it just displays the color of my background, which is black. Okay, then if I were to increase it, now then it becomes green color. Okay, so let's just drag it down to about halfway, maybe a bit more than halfway, maybe here. All right, so our material has a bit of transparency. Okay, then I will duplicate this. Okay, just Control D. Then I'll rename this just to be more organized. So I'll just name this can't attach material. So instead of a green color, I will choose a red color. Okay, so maybe a darker red. Okay. Okay, so I have a attached material which is green and a can't attach material which is red. Okay, so let's go to the socket interactor. Then let's assign this. So the hover mesh material, I will drag in my green material. The can't hover mesh material, I will drag in my red material. Like that. Okay, so now whenever let's say I move my cup here later, I will see this green material, and then when I hover or when I try to attach something to this socket, but it already has something else, then I will see this red material. Okay, so let me just show you this socket working. So let me play. Okay, so let's shift it to this angle. Okay, so I'm going to move my hand again, my right hand. Okay, let's go and grab, oops. Let's go and grab this cup. Hold G. Okay. Wait, hang on. It's a bit hard to aim. Okay, let me just make this table kinematic also, so it doesn't move around. Okay, move my hand. Move my hand. Okay. Okay, let's pick up the cup. Okay, so you can see that once I bring my cup to my socket interactor, you can see that there's this green highlight. So that just tells me that, okay, there's a socket interactor there. I can place my cup there. Okay, so let's say I come over here and then I see this green outline. Okay, now I'm going to release my G key. Okay, you can see that the cup snaps to the socket. Okay, then if I were to try and move my hand and am I intersecting with it? Okay, so if I were to move my hand there, how can I move my hand? Okay, if I move my hand there, press G again, okay, I can pick it up again. Okay, so you can see that the socket interactor is working. I can attach my cup there. So even if I were to try and rotate it some weird angle, so let's say I rotate it this way, then I want to snap it, you can see that the object snaps to a predetermined rotation and position. Okay, and the position and rotation that it snaps to, okay, I'm going to select the socket interactor. Okay, it is this attach transform. Okay, so this attach transform will determine where your object faces and also where your object will snap itself to. So if it's none, okay, just now we didn't assign anything. If it's none, okay, it will automatically create its own transform. It will create its own transform that by default is position 0, 0, 0, and rotation also 0, 0, 0. Okay, so essentially it will just snap to the socket interactor itself. Okay, so what happens if, let's say I have a socket interactor, okay, then I have more than one interactable in my scene. Okay, so that's where this can't hover mesh material will come into play. So this cup over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. So let me just exit play mode first. Okay, and then this cup I will duplicate. Okay, let's just make 3 cups. Okay, I'll just make 3 cups over here. Okay, maybe drag this one a bit further, a bit closer. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll show you when the can't hover material comes in. Okay, so I'm going to move my hand again. Okay, let's move this first cup. Okay, I will move it. Okay, then I see the green outline. Okay, I will release and let it snap. Okay, now let's move to this second cup over here. Okay, let's grab it. Okay, so now if I were to try and attach this cup to this socket over here, you'll see this red color material pop up now. So this is telling me that, okay, this socket is already occupied. You cannot attach anything else. So now if I were to try, let me zoom out a bit. So now if I were to try and release it here at this socket interactor, when it's red color, then you see that my second cup just falls to the ground. It just falls to the ground, right? Because this socket is already occupied. Okay, it cannot contain another object. So in order to fix that, I can go to my cup over here. I can grab it. I can move it back onto the table. Okay, then now let's pick up this other cup. Okay, G, and then we move it to the socket. Okay, you can see the highlight is now green. Release and it snaps. Right, so let's say that I'm not happy with where it's snapping. I'm not happy with where it's facing. Right, what we can do is, okay, exit play mode first. Go to your socket interactor, and then you can right click and then just create an empty object. Okay, so this empty object, I'll just name this like a snapping point. Okay, so just to keep it a bit more organized. Okay, so this snapping point, I can move it anywhere I want. I can rotate it any way I want, so that my object will snap to this orientation. So let's say this snapping point, maybe I move it up here. If for some reason I just want it to be here, and then I will rotate it a bit more like that. Okay, so when later our cup snaps here, snaps to this socket, it will actually snap to this offset that we have set. So in order for that to happen, we must link it up to this attach transform component here. So select the socket interactor, drag and drop your snapping point and drop it here. Okay, so now let's play and see what happens when we try that. Okay, so I will move my hand. Okay, I'm going to grab a cup. I'll grab this cup. Okay, then I'll bring it to my my socket. So you can see that previously my highlight was down here. You just look at my mouse, okay? But previously my highlight was down here near the corner, right? But now it's highlighting up there where my snapping point is. Right, so if I were to really release my my cup right now, you can see that it snaps up there, which is exactly where I put my snapping point. You can see that the rotation now is also orientated to my snapping point. It is following my snapping point. Okay, so one useful tip here is if you are creating this socket and then you're not sure where you want your object to face, okay, you can just snap it first. Okay, then you can move it around. You can see, okay, where do I want to put it properly? Maybe I want to put it here instead. You can move it down. Okay, so let's say I want it to snap like this for some reason. So let's say, okay, I want it to snap like this. Then what you want to do is same thing as what we did just now with our controller. Okay, we can copy component. Okay, that means we copy the values here. Then we exit play mode. Okay, then we can paste the values again. Okay, then you can see that now the snapping point has come down to where we set it to be just now. Right, so that is just a quick way to to test where your snapping point should be or where the ideal position and orientation should be. Okay, so we've talked about the hover and can't hover material, and we've also talked about the attach transform. Okay, so now let's look at the last thing here, which is the interaction layer mask. Right, so let's say that, okay, of these 3 cups here, I only want this cup in front here to be able to snap to this socket. So what I can do is I select this cup here, then I go to layer and then I choose add layer. So let's say in this layer, let's create 2 layers. So first layer, I'll say something like special cup. And then here I will just say normal cup. Right, so only one of these cups will be special, the rest will be normal. Right, so let's set that up. So let's say this first cup will be special. So I go to layer, I choose special cup. Okay, then they ask you want to change children, just say yes. Okay, then for my other 2 cups, I will just say I will just select both of them and I'll set them as normal cups. Okay, same thing, yes, change children. Okay, then in my socket interactor itself, then my interaction layer mask. Oops. Okay. Okay, so in my layer mask here, I also have to add my special cup and my normal cup. Okay. Okay. So the socket interactor, now if I were to look, okay, there will be special cup, normal cup. Okay, so in order to make it such that this interactor only accepts special cups, what I need to do is I need to select nothing first. Okay, select nothing, and then I select special cup. Alright, so now only special cups can be assigned to this socket. Now I'll go to my special cup here. Okay, then same thing for my interactable here. There's also this interaction layer mask. Okay, I have to set this to a special cup as well. Okay, so this default, previously it was this default layer, so just uncheck this by clicking on it. Make sure it only says special cup. Alright, so now let's try. We will play. Okay, so if I were to playing, right? Okay, so now if I were to try and grab this, let's say this cup down here, yeah. Okay, let's try and grab this cup. So this cup here that I'm hovering over right now is a normal cup. Right, so if I were to try and grab it and then I bring it to my socket, okay, you can see that the highlight doesn't even come up. Right, it doesn't want to detect this cup at all. Let me just, okay, when I try to drop it, it doesn't snap. Okay, compared to if I were to go over and pick up this special cup and bring it to my socket, okay, you can see that the highlight now turns on. And if I release it, okay, it snaps into place as expected. Okay, so that's how we can create sockets that are more selective. Right, sockets that only accept certain objects. Okay, so that's how we can implement that. Right. Okay, and then one last thing I will show is whenever we attach something to our socket, maybe you want something to happen. Okay, so I can go to my select event. I can press plus. Okay, so let's say whenever I attach something to my socket over here, for some reason, I want the light to switch off because that is the functionality that I have now in the project. Okay, just for this demo. Okay, so same thing, I will drag my light switch here, I will link my directional light, then I will say toggle light. Okay, then when I plug it out, I will toggle light again. Okay, so with this linked, what we should see is whenever I attach something to this socket, my light should turn off. When I detach something from it, my light will turn on again. So let's take a look, see whether that works. Okay, so I will move my hand again. Okay, then I will aim towards my special cup, which is this. Then I'll pick it up. I'll go to my socket. All right. So now that I have aligned the socket with the cup, let's release it. Okay. Then you'll see that the light turns off, right? Because I call the toggle light function here. Okay. So now let's go over and pick up the cup again. You can see that now when I pick it up from the socket, it lights up again. Okay, my light turns on. I plug it in, light turns off. I pick it up, light turns on. Right, so that's how we can use these events here to toggle or call a function whenever something is attached to our socket interactor. Okay, and then with that, we've also created something like a two-way switch, right? I can highlight this, I can turn on and off. So let's say I turn it on, then I go and pick up my cup. Okay, I turn it off. So something like a two-way switch has been created here. All right, so that's the end of the demo. Okay, just want you all to go and take some time, try it out, play around a bit with this socket interactor. Okay, and then any questions, anything you want me to repeat or elaborate, okay, you can just voice out or type in the chat. Okay, so I'll just pause here for a few minutes, let you all play around with this.